From the quiet, tree-lined streets of a seemingly ordinary American town, a story emerges, so deeply unsettling, so profoundly tragic, that it forces us to question the very foundations of what we believe to be true. Imagine a life, meticulously constructed, brick by carefully placed brick, only to have the entire edifice crumble beneath the weight of a single, devastating truth. This isn't a work of fiction, though it possesses all the chilling elements of one. This is the raw, unvarnished reality of a woman whose entire existence, every memory, every cherished photograph, every lullaby sung, was built upon a lie. Our story begins with Lena Abbott, a name that, for years, conjured images of warmth, dedication, and a life lived in service to her community. Lena, now in her early 40s, was a beloved kindergarten teacher in a quaint New England town, her days filled with the innocent laughter of children and the gentle hum of learning. She had a kind, open face, framed by soft, dark curls that often escaped her loose bun, and eyes that held a depth of compassion born from years of nurturing young minds. Her home, a cozy two-story house with a wraparound porch adorned with flowering vines, was a testament to a life of quiet domesticity. She was a pillar of her small community, known for her volunteer work at the local animal shelter and her delicious apple pies, always baked for school fundraisers. To anyone who knew her, Lena Abbott was the epitome of stability, a woman whose life seemed perfectly aligned with her gentle spirit. She often spoke of her childhood with fondness, of her mother, Elara Vance, a woman she described as strong, resilient, and fiercely independent. Elara, a seamstress by trade, had raised Lena alone, a fact Lena always admired, believing it forged a unique and unbreakable bond between them. Their home, though modest, was always filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the hum of Elara's sewing machine, sounds that were, for Lena, the very soundtrack of her youth. Elara, in her late 60s now, was a woman of sharp wit and even sharper eyes, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She rarely spoke of the past, a trait Lena attributed to her mother's stoic nature and perhaps a touch of old-world reserve. Lena had always accepted this, understanding that some people simply preferred to live in the present, not dwell on what came before. Yet, beneath this seemingly idyllic surface, a tiny fissure, almost imperceptible at first, had begun to form. It wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, but rather a series of whispers, subtle anomalies that, in isolation, could be dismissed as mere coincidences, but when viewed together, formed a disquieting pattern. These were not the whispers of gossip or idle chatter, but the almost imperceptible murmurs of destiny itself, trying to nudge Lena towards a truth she was not yet ready to confront. The first tremor came in the form of an old photograph, tucked away in a dusty album in Elara's attic. It was a faded, sepia-toned image of a young Elara, perhaps in her early 20s, holding a baby. The baby Lena assumed was herself, but something felt off. The baby in the photograph had wisps of light, almost strawberry blonde hair, and eyes that seemed too light, too blue to be hers. Lena's own hair was a deep, rich brown, and her eyes, though kind, were a warm hazel. She dismissed it, of course, attributing the discrepancy to the poor quality of old film or the trick of the light. "Babies change so much," Elara had said dismissively when Lena once pointed it out years ago, her voice a little too quick, a little too sharp. Lena, a trusting soul, had accepted the explanation without a second thought. Then there were the medical records. Lena had always been plagued by a rare blood disorder, a condition that required regular checkups and specific medications. It was a minor inconvenience, but it was her inconvenience. One afternoon, while filling out routine paperwork at her doctor's office, she noticed a discrepancy in her genetic history. The form asked for any family history of the disorder. Lena dutifully wrote none, as Elara had always told her. But the doctor, a meticulous woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, paused, her brow furrowed. "Are you sure, Ms. Abbott?" she had inquired, her voice soft but insistent. "Your blood work shows a marker that is almost exclusively inherited. It's quite rare for it to appear spontaneously." Lena felt a prickle of unease. My mother always said there was no history, she reiterated, her voice a little less confident. Dr. Reed simply nodded, making a note, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The most unnerving incident, however, occurred during a casual conversation with an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had lived in the town for over 70 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of its residents, was reminiscing about the old days. "Oh, Elara Vance," she had mused, her voice raspy with age. "Such a quiet woman. Moved here right after that terrible fire in the city, didn't she? Must have been right after little Lena was born." Mrs. Henderson paused, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Funny. I always remembered Lena being a few years older when Elara first arrived. And wasn't she such a tiny thing for her age?" Lena's heart gave a strange lurch. "No, Mrs. Henderson, I was born right here," Lena corrected gently, trying to mask the sudden surge of anxiety. Mrs. Henderson simply blinked, a look of mild confusion on her face. "Oh, well, my memory isn't what it used to be, dear. Getting old, you know." Lena tried to shake off these disparate occurrences, to rationalize them away as the quirks of aging memories, the vagaries of old photographs, or simple medical misunderstandings. But they lingered, like an uninvited guest, whispering in the quiet moments, during the long drives home from school, or while she meticulously watered her rose bushes. There was a growing sense that something fundamental about her life, something she had always accepted as immutable fact, was subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifting beneath her feet. The foundation was no longer as solid as she believed. The true weight of these unsettling anomalies began to press down on Lena after Elara suffered a sudden, severe stroke. The vibrant, sharp-witted woman Lena knew was suddenly frail, her words slurred, her memory fragmented. It was during this emotionally fraught time, sifting through Elara's belongings to organize her affairs, that Lena stumbled upon a small, lacquered wooden box, hidden beneath a pile of old linens in a locked chest. The box wasn't much to look at, but its weight felt significant in her hands. Inside, nestled amongst moth-eaten lace and yellowed letters, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It was open, revealing two tiny, faded photographs. One was of a young woman Lena didn't recognize, her face a blur of sadness. The other, however, sent a jolt of ice through Lena's veins. It was a baby, swaddled in a white blanket, with wisps of light, almost strawberry blonde hair, and eyes that were undeniably light, undeniably blue. The same baby from the old, faded photograph. But this time, there was no dismissing it as a trick of the light. The date engraved on the back of the locket was a full 3 years before Lena's official birth certificate date. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the familiar scent of old paper and dust suddenly heavy with unspoken secrets. This wasn't just a discrepancy. It was an undeniable, chilling contradiction. The baby in the locket wasn't just similar to the baby in the old album. It was the baby, an echo from a time Lena had no conscious memory of, yet somehow knew, deep in her gut, was intrinsically linked to her. The carefully constructed narrative of her life, the one Elara had woven so meticulously, began to unravel with terrifying speed. Every loving gesture, every stern admonition, every shared laugh now felt tainted, viewed through the prism of this horrifying possibility. Who was this baby? And more terrifyingly, if that baby wasn't her, then who was Lena Abbott truly? The question hung in the air, a silent scream in the quiet solitude of Elara's dusty attic, promising to shatter everything Lena thought she knew about herself and the woman she called mother. This was not just a story of a hidden past. It was the terrifying awakening to a truth so profound. It threatened to redefine her very identity. And the journey to uncover it was only just beginning. The silver locket, tarnished and whispering of secrets, became a cold, heavy anchor in Lena's hand. The discovery in Elara's attic wasn't just a revelation. It was an earthquake, fracturing the very ground beneath her. Every childhood memory, every shared laugh, every quiet moment with Elara now felt tainted, viewed through the chilling prism of this newfound contradiction. The image of the light-haired, blue-eyed baby undeniably not her, yet dated years before her official birth, pulsed with a silent, terrifying question. Who am I, really? Lena, a woman whose life had been built on order and gentle routines, was suddenly adrift in a swirling vortex of doubt and fear. The cozy, familiar house, once a sanctuary of warmth, now felt like a stage set for a play she hadn't known she was starring in. She looked at Elara, frail and vulnerable in her hospital bed, the woman who had nurtured her, taught her to read, mended her scraped knees, and patiently explained the mysteries of the world. How could this gentle, loving figure harbor such a monumental deception? The thought was a searing brand on her soul, a betrayal so profound it threatened to consume her. She didn't confront Elara immediately. The stroke had left Elara's mind a fractured landscape, coherent one moment, lost in the next. Lena knew that demanding answers now would be futile, and perhaps even cruel. But the urgency to uncover the truth gnawed at her, a relentless drumbeat in her chest. She began to search, methodically, painstakingly, through Elara's sparse belongings. She wasn't sure what she was looking for: a diary, a letter, anything that could offer a crumb of explanation. Most of what she found were mundane, everyday items. Old bills, knitting patterns, faded recipes. But then, tucked inside an old Bible, its pages worn thin from years of use, she found a small, unmarked envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, there were no grand confessions, no dramatic revelations. Instead, there were 2 crisp newspaper clippings yellowed with age. The first, from a local paper in a town called Willow Creek, Virginia, bore the headline, "Baby girl vanishes from hospital nursery, police suspect abduction." The date on the clipping was precisely 3 years before Lena's official birth certificate date, and chillingly, it was the same date engraved on the back of the locket. The second clipping, from a few weeks later, was smaller, less prominent. Search continues for missing infant, no new leads. It mentioned the baby's name, Sarah Jenkins. Sarah Jenkins. The name resonated with an eerie familiarity, a ghost of a memory that she couldn't quite grasp. Lena felt a cold dread spread through her veins. Willow Creek, Virginia. It wasn't New England. It was hundreds of miles away. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, were now violently snapping into place, forming a picture of unimaginable horror. The light-haired, blue-eyed baby in the locket, the strange discrepancy in her own birth date, Elara's evasiveness about her past. It all converged on one horrifying conclusion. She wasn't Lena Abbott. She was Sarah Jenkins, and she had been kidnapped as a baby. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her mother, the woman who had loved and raised her, was a kidnapper. The gentle hands that had soothed her fevers and braided her hair were the same hands that had ripped her from her true family. The warmth of Elara's embrace now felt like a suffocating shroud. Lena staggered back, the newspaper clippings fluttering to the floor like discarded autumn leaves. Her world, meticulously built on a foundation of love and trust, had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. For days, Lena moved through her life in a daze, performing her duties at school with a hollow smile, her mind replaying the headlines, the locket, Elara's evasive eyes. She felt like an imposter, living a borrowed life, wearing a borrowed name. The silence of her own home became unbearable, filled with the accusing echoes of a stolen past. She knew she had to investigate, to find out what truly happened to Sarah Jenkins. But where to begin? And how could she do this without destroying the last vestiges of the life she knew? Her first instinct was to go to the police, but a paralyzing fear held her back. What would happen to Elara? And what would happen to her? Would she be seen as an accomplice, albeit an unknowing one? The thought of tearing down everything, of exposing this monstrous secret, was terrifying. Yet the alternative, living a lie, was even more unbearable. She started by meticulously researching Willow Creek, Virginia, online. She found old articles, historical records, anything that might shed more light on the Jenkins family. It was a small town, and the kidnapping of a baby had clearly been a significant event, even decades later. She found an archived newspaper article from the Willow Creek Gazette, a more detailed account of the abduction. It spoke of Arthur and Beatrice Jenkins, a young couple, overjoyed at the birth of their first child, Sarah. Beatrice was described as a radiant young woman with striking blue eyes and hair the color of sun-ripened wheat. Arthur, a local carpenter, was portrayed as a devoted father, eagerly anticipating a life with his new family. The article detailed the hospital's shock, the police investigation, the desperate pleas from the family for the baby's return. There was even a blurred, black-and-white photograph of Beatrice, her face etched with unimaginable grief, holding a tiny, embroidered blanket similar to one Lena vaguely remembered seeing tucked away in a box of baby clothes Elara had kept. A profound, aching sadness washed over Lena. This was her family. These were her parents. The parents she had been robbed of, the life she had been denied. The anger, sharp and incandescent, began to mingle with the grief. How could Elara have done this? What kind of twisted love was this, built on such a monstrous act? Lena imagined Beatrice's heartbreak, Arthur's despair, the decades of longing and unanswered questions. It was a pain that transcended time, a wound that never healed. And Lena was living proof of that wound. She decided to approach the situation with caution, to gather as much information as possible before making any drastic moves. She found a genealogical website and, using the sparse details she had about Elara's supposed past before arriving in New England, began to piece together a fragmented picture. Elara had a distant cousin, a woman named Margaret Dawson, who lived in a neighboring state. Margaret was listed as the only living relative on Elara's side, a detail Lena had never questioned. Perhaps Margaret knew something. Perhaps she held another piece of the puzzle. Reaching out to Margaret was a step into the unknown. What would she say? Would she be hostile, defensive, or simply ignorant? Lena crafted a careful email, ostensibly about Elara's health, gently probing for any old family stories, any recollections of Elara's life before she settled in New England. She waited, her heart a drum against her ribs. When Margaret finally replied, her email was brief, but contained a cryptic line that sent another shiver down Lena's spine. Elara always was a bit of a wanderer, dear, and after that unfortunate incident with her sister, she just packed up and left. Never looked back. Her sister? Lena had no knowledge of Elara having a sister. Another lie, another layer of deception. The mention of an unfortunate incident hinted at a darker past, a life Elara had meticulously erased. The more Lena uncovered, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. Each answer only begot more questions, each revelation more horrifying than the last. The weight of this stolen identity pressed down on her, suffocating her. She was not just investigating a cold case. She was unearthing the very roots of her own existence, and with each discovery, the line between who she thought she was and who she truly was blurred, dissolving into a terrifying uncertainty. The journey to the truth was proving to be a descent into a labyrinth of deceit, and Lena, armed only with a tarnished locket and a growing sense of dread, was determined to find her way out. But the path ahead was fraught with peril, and the true cost of knowledge remained to be seen. The cryptic message from Margaret Dawson, hinting at an unfortunate incident and a hidden sister, ignited a fresh fire in Lena. The notion that Elara, the woman she knew as her stoic, solitary mother, had an entire unacknowledged past, including family members Lena knew nothing about, was a bitter pill to swallow. It solidified the terrifying truth. Elara's life, and by extension Lena's own, was a meticulously crafted facade. The search for Sarah Jenkins was no longer just about finding her true parents. It was about unraveling the complex, tangled web of lies that had defined her existence. Lena decided to approach Margaret Dawson directly, but with extreme caution. She couldn't reveal her true suspicions over the phone or in an email. The stakes were too high. She needed to observe, to listen, to gauge Margaret's reactions in person. Willow Creek, Virginia, was still a distant, terrifying destination, but Margaret lived closer, in a small town in Pennsylvania. It was a tangible first step into the murky depths of Elara's concealed history. She arranged a visit under the guise of discussing Elara's declining health and the need to sort through old family matters. Margaret, a woman in her late 70s with eyes as sharp and discerning as Elara's, but with a more open, if slightly weary, demeanor, greeted Lena warmly. Their conversation initially revolved around pleasantries and shared concerns about Elara. Lena carefully steered the discussion towards Elara's younger years, mentioning the lack of family stories and expressing a gentle curiosity. Elara was always a closed book, wasn't she? Margaret sighed, stirring her tea. Especially after what happened with Evelyn. Lena's breath hitched. Evelyn? She had a sister named Evelyn? She tried to keep her voice even, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Margaret looked surprised. Oh dear. Didn't Elara ever tell you about Evelyn? They were inseparable growing up, thick as thieves. But then Evelyn got involved with a bad crowd, always chasing trouble. She was a beautiful girl, striking with that bright, almost fiery red hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Not like Elara, who was always so quiet and careful. Evelyn. She made a lot of poor choices. And then came the baby. The baby. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Lena felt a chill. A baby? She managed, her voice barely a whisper. Margaret nodded, her gaze drifting to a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. A faded image of two young women, one dark-haired and serious, the other with a cascade of vibrant red hair, her arm thrown playfully around the first. Evelyn. Yes, Evelyn's baby. A little girl. It was a scandal, of course, back then. Evelyn was so young, barely out of her teens. Elara, bless her heart, tried to help her, tried to get her to settle down. But Evelyn, she wasn't ready to be a mother. And then the baby, she just vanished. One day, Evelyn left her at the hospital, said she couldn't cope. Elara was heartbroken. She always blamed herself, said she should have done more to help Evelyn. Lena listened, a knot forming in her stomach. This was a parallel narrative, horrifyingly close to her own, yet subtly different. The baby was left at the hospital, not kidnapped. But the timeline, the secrecy, Elara's involvement, it all felt connected. What happened to Evelyn? Lena asked, trying to sound casual. Margaret's face clouded. Oh, Evelyn. She never really recovered. She left town shortly after, disappeared completely. Elara tried to find her for years, but eventually gave up. It broke her, it really did. She changed after that, became even more withdrawn. Then, a few years later, she suddenly showed up with you, dear. A tiny baby, a new beginning, she said. Never really spoke about where she came from with you, just that she found her purpose. The words hit Lena like a tidal wave. She showed up with you, not gave birth to you, not adopted you through official channels. Showed up with you. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Elara's sister, Evelyn, had a baby Evelyn couldn't cope with. And then, at some point, that baby vanished. And Elara, heartbroken and perhaps driven by a desperate desire for a child, or to salvage something from the wreckage of her sister's life, had taken another baby, Sarah Jenkins, to fill that void. The dates, the disappearances, the unacknowledged sister, the hospital connection. It was all too precise. Elara hadn't just met Lena. She had acquired her. The implications were staggering. Elara hadn't kidnapped Sarah Jenkins for herself, at least not initially out of malice. It was a desperate act, perhaps fueled by grief and a twisted sense of redemption, after the loss of her sister's child. This didn't excuse the act, not by a long shot, but it added a layer of profound tragedy to Elara's monstrous deception. She had stolen a life, but perhaps she had also lost one. Lena left Margaret's house feeling a strange mix of sorrow and a newfound clarity. The truth was ugly, but it was her truth. She was Sarah Jenkins, a baby stolen not just by a kidnapper, but by a woman who herself was deeply wounded. The connection to Willow Creek, Virginia, now felt less like a terrifying void and more like a path to her rightful history. Her next step was clear. She had to go to Willow Creek. She needed to see the town where she was born, to walk the streets her real parents had walked, to breathe the air of her stolen infancy. It was a pilgrimage, a desperate attempt to reclaim a past that had been so cruelly taken from her. She took a leave of absence from her teaching job, citing a family emergency, and packed a small bag. The locket, her only tangible link to Sarah Jenkins, was clutched tightly in her hand. Willow Creek was a small, quiet town, nestled in a valley, with a main street lined with old brick buildings. It felt profoundly alien, yet strangely familiar, as if her subconscious recognized something from a time before memory. She found the old hospital, now a modern medical center, but the original wing where the nursery would have been still stood. She stood outside, staring up at the windows, a wave of unspeakable sadness washing over her. Here, her life had been ripped apart. She visited the local library, a charming old building with creaky wooden floors. She delved deeper into the newspaper archives, finding even more detailed accounts of the Sarah Jenkins kidnapping. The raw grief of Arthur and Beatrice Jenkins leapt off the yellowed pages. She saw a more vivid picture of their desperation. The community vigils, the tireless searches, the haunting anniversaries. There were articles about Beatrice's declining health after the abduction. A broken woman, consumed by loss. Arthur, described as a man who aged 20 years in a single night, never gave up hope, tirelessly pursuing every lead, no matter how faint. One particular article, published on what would have been Sarah's 5th birthday, carried a heartbreaking quote from Arthur. "Every day, we light a candle for our Sarah. We pray she's safe wherever she is. We just want to know she's alive. We just want her home." Lena's eyes blurred with tears as she read the words. This was her father. This was his undying love. This was the family she never knew, the love she was denied. She also found a small notice, published years later, announcing the death of Beatrice Jenkins. The obituary mentioned her profound and lingering grief over the disappearance of her beloved daughter, Sarah. The news was a cruel blow. Her mother was gone. The chance to meet her, to embrace her, to explain everything, was lost forever. A bitter wave of regret and anger washed over Lena. Elara had not only stolen her childhood, but had also robbed her of the chance to know her mother, to offer comfort, to heal together. As Lena sat in the quiet library, surrounded by the echoes of a stolen life, a new determination solidified within her. She was not just Sarah Jenkins. She was also a testament to the enduring love of Arthur and Beatrice. She had to find Arthur. He was her last living link to her true family, the only one who could truly confirm the pieces of this fractured puzzle. The journey had been one of heartbreak and shocking revelation, but it was also a journey of self-discovery, a reclamation of a past she never knew she had. The shadow of Elara's deception still loomed, but the light of her true identity, of Sarah Jenkins, was beginning to shine through, guiding her toward the next, most crucial step. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Lena felt a clear sense of purpose. The quiet determination that had solidified in Lena's heart in the Willow Creek Library propelled her forward. Her mother, Beatrice, was gone, a cruel twist of fate that underscored the profound injustice of her stolen life. But Arthur, her father, was still out there. He was the last living piece of her true family, the keeper of memories she desperately yearned to reclaim. Finding him became her singular focus, a beacon in the swirling darkness of her fractured identity. She returned to the library, her quest now imbued with a fierce urgency. She spent hours poring over old phone books, reverse directories, and archived public records, tracing any mention of Arthur Jenkins. The name, once a mere notation on a yellowed clipping, now vibrated with a living connection. It was slow, painstaking work, filled with dead ends and false hopes. Many Arthur Jenkinses appeared, but none seemed to fit the profile of the heartbroken carpenter from Willow Creek. Then, after days of relentless searching, a small, handwritten obituary from a regional newspaper caught her eye. It wasn't Arthur's, but it mentioned the passing of an Eleanor Vance, Elara's maiden name, and subtly referenced her sister, Evelyn, who had died years prior. What truly seized Lena's attention was a small, italicized note at the bottom. Survived by her devoted brother-in-law, Arthur Jenkins, formerly of Willow Creek, Virginia. A gasp escaped Lena's lips. Arthur Jenkins was Elara's brother-in-law? But how? And why had he never been mentioned? The puzzle was even more intricate than she had imagined. It meant Arthur had some connection, however distant, to Elara and Evelyn. This was not just a random kidnapping. There was a deeper, more unsettling link. The obituary provided an address for Arthur, a quiet suburban neighborhood several states away. Lena didn't hesitate. She booked the first flight she could, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. This was it, the moment of truth. The house was modest, well-kept, with a small garden bursting with colorful blooms. Lena stood on the porch, her hand hovering over the doorbell, a lifetime of unspoken questions trembling on her lips. What would she say? How could she possibly explain the unbelievable narrative that had brought her to his doorstep? The door opened, and a man stood before her. His hair was sparse and gray, his face etched with the lines of age and quiet sorrow, but his eyes were a startling, familiar blue. The same blue as the baby in the locket. The same blue she now saw reflected in her own mirror every morning. It was him, Arthur Jenkins, her father. Mr. Jenkins? Lena's voice was hoarse. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, followed by a profound, almost unreadable sadness. Yes, my name is Lena Abbott, she began, then hesitated. The lie tasted like ash. No, my name is Sarah Jenkins. The words hung in the air, shattering the silence. Arthur's face crumpled. His hand flew to his mouth, a choked gasp escaping him. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes, filled with disbelief, then with a dawning, terrifying hope. Sarah? He whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. My Sarah. Tears streamed down Lena's face as she pulled out the tarnished silver locket. This was in her things, she said, holding it out, along with old newspaper clippings about a baby girl named Sarah Jenkins, stolen from Willow Creek Hospital almost 40 years ago. Arthur reached out, his hand trembling as he took the locket. His fingers traced the engraved date, then opened it, his gaze falling on the tiny, faded photograph of the baby. He looked up at Lena, his eyes brimming. It's you, he choked out. My baby girl, my Sarah. The embrace that followed was decades in the making, a torrent of grief, joy, and unspeakable relief. He held her tightly, rocking her gently, murmuring her name. Sarah, my Sarah, you're home, you're finally home. The tears they shed were for the lost years, for Beatrice, for the life that should have been, but also for the miraculous, impossible reunion that had defied all odds. In the days that followed, Arthur, still reeling from the shock, began to fill in the missing pieces. He confirmed the story of Elara and Evelyn. Evelyn, Lena's biological aunt, had been a wild spirit, indeed, but also fragile, struggling with addiction and mental health issues. She had, in fact, given birth to a baby girl, just as Margaret had described, but the baby had died shortly after birth due to complications. It was a tragedy that devastated Elara, who had adored her sister and the idea of becoming an aunt. Elara had always blamed herself for not being able to save Evelyn or her baby. It was during this time of profound grief and mental fragility that Elara, working as a hospital aide in a different city, learned of the tragic kidnapping of baby Sarah Jenkins in Willow Creek, a story that had gripped the nation. Driven by a twisted, desperate need to fill the void left by her sister's lost child, and perhaps in a delusional attempt to correct Evelyn's inability to be a mother, Elara had acted on a sudden, impulsive urge. She knew the hospital layout. She knew the procedures. And in a moment of unimaginable desperation, she had taken Sarah, convincing herself she was giving the baby a better life, a life her sister's child never had. She had then fled to New England, creating a new identity, a new past, and a new life for Lena Abbott. The connection to Arthur was a horrifying coincidence. Elara's family had moved to the same state as Arthur years after the kidnapping, never knowing he was the heartbroken father of the child Elara had stolen. Their paths had never crossed until now. The full weight of Elara's actions, fueled by a complex cocktail of grief, delusion, and a profound, misguided love, finally became clear. It was a story of two broken families, tragically intertwined by a single, desperate act. Lena, now Sarah, spent weeks with Arthur, poring over old photo albums, listening to stories of Beatrice, of their life before the abduction, of the hope they never truly lost. She visited Beatrice's grave, a quiet, tearful moment of connection with the mother she never knew. The void in her heart began to slowly, painstakingly, fill. The decision of what to do about Elara was excruciating. She was Lena's mother, in every practical sense, for 4 decades. But she was also Sarah's kidnapper. Ultimately, Sarah chose not to press charges. Elara was already frail, suffering from a stroke, living in a fractured reality. To expose her now would not only cause further pain to Elara, but also to Sarah herself, and to Arthur, who understood the complex, tragic circumstances. Instead, Sarah decided to visit Elara one last time, not as Lena, but as Sarah. She held Elara's hand, looking into her confused eyes. She didn't speak of the past, of the kidnapping, or the lies. She simply thanked Elara for the love she had given, the life she had provided, flawed as it was. It was a quiet, bittersweet farewell to the woman who had both stolen and shaped her life. Sarah Jenkins began her new chapter, slowly integrating into Arthur's life, rebuilding lost connections. The healing was a long, arduous process, but she was no longer alone. She had a name, a history, and a family. The story of Sarah Jenkins, the baby kidnapped as a baby, was no longer a whispered secret, but a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of truth, and to the unbreakable bonds of family. And as for us, observing this incredible journey, it serves as a powerful reminder. The human heart, in its capacity for both love and despair, can weave tapestries of such profound complexity. But even in the deepest shadows, the threads of truth will, eventually, find their way to the light. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stories lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered? What other truths are waiting to emerge, to redefine a life, to heal a wound? If this incredible journey resonated with you, if it left you questioning the layers beneath the surface of everyday life, then perhaps you'll consider joining our community. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single one of these profound, real-life mysteries. There are always more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, and together, we can continue to explore the hidden depths of the human experience. Thank you for watching.